Today I'd like to talk about cross-cultural issues in recovery from addiction. I recently did a review of the literature addressing the culturally competent practitioner in serving addicts in recovery. And one of the things that stood out for me, it was hard for me not to be deeply affected by the disproportionate percentage of substance abusers in both the Native American and African American populations. In fact, it occurs to me that any simplistic, culturally insensitive, or historically ignorant view, for example, towards just say no, must surely take into account, at least to my way of thinking, the huge historical displacement and enslavement of these two ethnic groups. There's such a high percentage of addiction in their populations. We have to address that. And I think this is where the biopsychosocial and even cultural perspective that we've been talking about in other videos, and that lies right at the heart of our program here at Cal Southern. I think it's why it's so essential. You can't look at somebody's addiction outside of their cultural, their ethnic, their historical background. To further this, I think it's ironic that treatment providers, all the way from detox hospital units to rehabs, they're also represented quite disproportionately in terms of both race and class. Professionals, for example, perhaps not surprisingly, are disproportionately white and middle to upper middle class. That is, psychiatrists, psychologists, and other therapists are most often white. On the other hand, paraprofessional staff, and here I'm thinking of chemical dependency counselors, aftercare support team members, and so on, they're most often both recovering themselves from addiction and also non-white and non-middle class. Middle class or lower. It's not hard to imagine then, is it, the possibility for poor clinical matches, or at least what I want to call empathic disconnects. In particular, professional staff, I believe, are at risk for missing their clients' unique cultural, ethnic, and socioeconomic embeddedness, unless there's a lot of clear intention and attention given to filling in gaps in understanding and life experience. I want to give you one example of existing mental health practices and assumptions that unless revised, don't serve significant populations of those who are seeking recovery from addiction. African-centered, Muslim-based, Asian, and or Native American-centered cultural perspectives all emphasize the acquisition of power, for example, spiritual power, communal power, personal power. They emphasize the acquisition of power instead of notions of powerlessness. So what do you do then with the fact that powerlessness is espoused in traditional approaches to treatment of substance abuse, including the 12-step programs? It's probably vital that we consider a different language, for sure, a different entry point than if we're talking about cultures for whom talking about powerlessness is an impediment or a block to really effective treatment. And in fact, what I'm reviewing is that programs in which emphasis is placed on group and communal healing, for example, where the focus is on interdependence instead of individualized treatment plans, and also the use of respect as much as confrontation, respect between the staff and the client. All of these are crucial from the aforementioned ethnic groups that are seeking treatment for addiction. Successful recovery for many non-white substance abusers then must be accompanied by and encompass cultural teachings that are spiritual, relational, and intergenerational. Furthermore, I think it's on counselors to self-examine both in terms of potential bias, blind spots, or even prejudices, and also to assume right from the outset that culture, including race differences and class differences, that these must be integrated right into the heart of effective treatment. As I've mentioned before, recovery integral therapist and theorist Ken Wilber, his dictum is context is everything. Certainly that's the case here as we're talking about cross-cultural values, assumption, and norms. I think the responsibility for integrating more culturally sensitive perspectives, I believe it rests squarely on the shoulders of the responsible recovery coach or counselor, and that he or she must be equipped to, with the latest of information, continual self-examination, and finally I want to say a real desire and openness to learning from the client to make for what I'd like to say would be optimal responsiveness to the recovering addict in treatment. Thank you.